Welcome back to the deep dive. We spend a lot of time on this show looking at the what.
Yeah, the daily headlines, the market shifts.
Exactly what's happening in tech or geopolitics. But today, based on this stack of research you sent over, we are looking at the why. And honestly, it starts with a map.
It always starts with a map, doesn't it?
Really does.
Yeah.
But it's a confusing map. Because if you look at the globe purely based on natural resources, just, where the gold is, the oil, the fertile land.
Right, the raw materials.
Yeah, you'd expect the Democratic Republic of the Congo to be this absolute economic superpower. It should be Wakanda, essentially.
Absolutely.
And then you might expect a rock in the middle of the North Atlantic like Iceland or even parts of Japan to be really struggling.
And yet the reality is the exact inverse.
Right. And that creates this fundamental tension for anyone looking at this.
Yeah.
Why are some countries, mostly in the so-called global North, incredibly wealthy and powerful, while others in the global South are stuck in these persistent cycles of economic hardship?
Especially when they're blessedly resource rich.
Exactly. And the sources we're covering today argue that this isn't just bad luck. It's not a roll of the dice.
No, it is highly structural. And that's really the mission for today's deep dive. We aren't just memorizing definitions for a geography quiz here.
Right, no textbooks today.
We're going to look at the 4 pillars of global development theory that attempt to explain this exact inequality. And fair warning to you listening, these theories do not play nice with each other.
Not at all.
They fundamentally disagree on how the world actually works.
It's a bit of an academic cage match, honestly. We've got the optimist, the cynic, the system builder, and the pragmatist.
That's a great way to frame it. 4 very different lenses to interpret the exact same reality.
So let's set the scene a bit before we bring in our first fighter. We hear global North and global South thrown around constantly in the news, right?
Constantly.
It used to be first world and third world, but we've mostly moved away from that, haven't we?
We have. Third world is really a Cold War relic. It originally just meant countries that weren't aligned with the U.S. or the USSR.
Oh, right. It didn't strictly mean poor.
Exactly. But today, global North generally refers to the wealthier industrialized nations, think the U.S., Europe, Japan, Australia, and the global South encompasses the developing world like Latin America, Africa, parts of Asia.
But the key insight from the reading isn't just about labeling things.
No, it's the pattern. Wealth isn't scattered randomly across the globe like sprinkles on a donut, it clumps.
And that clumping suggests there are rules to the game.
Exactly. Geography, history, and politics create a landscape where a country's bank balance actually makes sense if you understand the underlying system.
Right.
The source material uses the U.S. versus the DRC as the prime example. The DRC has trillions of dollars in untapped mineral wealth.
Trillions.
Yes, while the U.S. has a largely service-based economy. But the history of how those two interact defines why the map looks the way it does today.
So let's look at the first attempt to explain this system, the optimist. This is Walter Rostow and his stages of economic growth.
Rostow is fascinating because he is the ultimate product of the 1950s. He's writing this during the height of the Cold War, and he's basically trying to write a manifesto for capitalism.
A how-to guide.
Exactly. He's telling the developing world, hey, you don't need communism. You just need to follow these specific steps.
It really reads like a video game walkthrough. Level 1 to level 5.
Yeah.
If you beat the boss, you advance to the next stage.
It really is a linear model. Rostow's theory assumes that development is this ladder. Every country, no matter if you are Sweden or Somalia, starts at the bottom and climbs the exact same rungs to get to the top.
And the subtle implication there is that if you aren't at the top, you just haven't climbed long enough.
Or you aren't trying hard enough. It's a very internal model. Success is completely up to you and your internal policies.
So let's walk the listener through these 5 levels, because they are essentially the blueprint for how the Western worldviews progress even today. Level 1 is traditional society.
This is the baseline. Limited technology, a static society. Most people are in subsistence agriculture.
Meaning you grow what you eat and you eat what you grow.
Right. There's no surplus to sell, so there's no capital to invest. You're just treading water.
It's survival mode.
Yeah.
But then something sparks. Level 2 is preconditions for takeoff.
Takeoff is the key metaphor here. He's thinking of an airplane on a runway. In level 2, you get some external investment. Maybe a World Bank loan comes in for a dam or a new road network.
Infrastructure, basically.
Yes. And agriculture gets a little more mechanized, so you don't need everyone working in the fields. That frees up labor to go do other things.
Which fuels the engines for level 3, which is the actual takeoff.
The pivotal moment. The Industrial Revolution. Factories open up. And this is crucial to remember, it's usually only in a few specific sectors.
Like textiles, maybe food processing.
Exactly. It's very localized growth.
Yeah.
But the economy fundamentally changes its structure from farming to making things.
And once the plane is in the air, you hit level 4. Drive to maturity.
Now the technology spreads. It's not just T-shirts anymore. You're making complex machinery. You're building out infrastructure, schools, hospitals.
The whole society levels up,
The growth diffuses everywhere. The economy completely diversifies.
leading us to the promised land. Level 5. And the title of this stage is incredibly telling about American values in the mid-century, the age of high mass consumption.
It is literally the 1950s American dream codified into economic theory.
Right.
The service sector takes over. People have disposable income. You aren't worrying about survival anymore. You're worrying about which color Ford to buy or getting the latest washing machine.
It sounds great. It's a very seductive story because it essentially tells you, don't worry, global inequality is just a timing issue.
It really mirrors the demographic transition model regarding population. It implies an inevitable march toward prosperity. Just keep going. You'll get there.
But, and here comes the deep dive reality check.
Yeah.
The sources we have are pretty brutal in their critique of Rostow.
Oh, they tear him apart.
They basically say this is a nice fairy tale.
And they do it for a few very good reasons.
The first issue is what I'd call survivor bias.
That is a perfect way to put it. Rostow looked at Britain and the U.S. and said, okay, this is how it works.
But critics argued this is Eurocentric to the extreme.
Highly Eurocentric. It assumes every culture actually wants to be a high-mass consumption society. It ignores cultural differences entirely.
Right. Maybe the goal of every society isn't to own 3 cars and a riding lawnmower.
Exactly.
But the bigger issue, and this is the one that really sticks out to me, is the vacuum problem. Rostow talks about countries like their plants in separate pots.
Right, like if you water the plant, it grows. It doesn't matter what the plant next to it is doing.
Yeah, but in the real world, the plants are fighting for the exact same sunlight. Rostow totally ignores geopolitics.
He ignores the fact that for Britain to hit its takeoff, it had to colonize half the world to get the cheap cotton for those textile mills.
So a country like the DRC today, they can't just take off because the airspace is already crowded with jumbo jets from the global north who might not want them up there.
Exactly. Rostow assumes development is a purely internal process. He ignores that other countries might be actively blocking your progress or extracting your wealth to fuel their own stage 5.
He ignores the exploitation that fuels the takeoff.
Spot on.
Which brings us crashing down from the optimist ladder to our second pillar. This is the cynic, or perhaps the realist, depending on how you look at it, dependency theory.
This is a massive vibe shift. If Rostow says you're poor because you haven't started yet, dependency theory says you're poor because we made you poor.
Oof, that is a heavy accusation.
It is. Dependency theory emerged in the 1960s, largely from Latin American scholars who looked at Rostow's model and said, wait, this doesn't match our reality at all.
Right. They're saying we are working hard, we have resources, but we aren't getting rich.
Exactly. They argued that the poverty of the periphery, meaning the developing world, is a direct structural result of the wealth of the core.
So it's a zero-sum game. For me to win, you have to lose.
Precisely. The argument is that the global economy is structured intentionally to keep the global south dependent on the global north.
The source material brings up neocolonialism here. We know the flags came down, right? The British Empire doesn't own countries on paper anymore.
Right, formal colonialism ended.
But this theory suggests the empire never really left it. It's just put on a suit and tie.
The flags came down, but the trade contracts stayed exactly the same. The source actually uses a very vivid, slightly hilarious phrase to describe this arrangement.
I saw that. They called it a stanky arrangement.
A stanky arrangement. It's funny, but it's incredibly accurate. Think about the International Division of Labor. What is the actual role of the periphery?
They extract, they cut down the trees, they mine the cobalt for our batteries, they grow the coffee.
And they are forced to sell it cheap. And what does the core do?
We take those raw materials, we process them, turn them into iPhones and heavy machinery, and then sell them back to the periphery at a massive markup.
And that is the trap. The core creates the value-added goods, while the periphery provides the low-value raw materials.
Right.
But here's the real kicker for the core to maintain that high mass consumption. For us to have cheap T-shirts and affordable electronics, we absolutely need the periphery to stay cheap.
So if the periphery actually developed, if the workers in the cobalt mines demanded Western wages and Western prices for their resources, our economy would crash.
Our standard of living would plummet overnight. So structurally, the system fights against the development of the periphery.
Wow.
Rostow says climb the ladder, but dependency theory says the guy at the top is actively kicking the ladder away.
That's a depressing but really compelling perspective. It explains perfectly why a country can be rich in resources but poor in cash. The profit is simply being captured elsewhere.
It explains the DRC perfectly. The wealth of the Congo isn't staying in the Congo. It's flowing directly into the bank accounts of tech companies and manufacturers in the global north.
Now, this idea of a rigged system leads us to our third pillar. It's almost like a software upgrade to dependency theory. This is Immanuel Wallerstein's world systems theory.
Wallerstein is the system builder.
Mm-hmm.
He takes that strict binary view of dependency theory, the core versus periphery, and he says, look, it's a little too black and white. The world is messier than that.
He views the entire globe as one giant interconnected machine, like one organism.
Right. You can't analyze a country in isolation. You have to analyze its function within the global capitalist machine. And his big innovation was adding a middle ground, the semi-periphery.
The middle management of the global economy.
That is the absolute perfect analogy.
Ah.
So you have the core, the high-tech, high-profit dominant nations like the U.S., Canada, Western Europe.
The early adopters of industrialization.
Exactly. And you have the periphery, the low-skill, labor-intensive extraction zones.
Yeah.
But then you have the semi-periphery. These are countries that have industrialized. They manufacture things. They aren't just digging dirt.
But they don't hold the patent rights or the banking power of the core.
Right. They exploit the periphery, so they might buy raw materials from Africa, but they are in turn exploited by the core, who buys their finished goods.
The classic examples given in the reading are the BRICS nations, right?
Mhm.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
China is the ultimate example of this over the last 30 years.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about it. China imports raw materials from the periphery, getting oil from Angola, copper from Chile, then manufactures goods using massive labor forces, which is a semi-peripheral activity.
And then sells them right to the core.
Exactly.
But China's interesting because they seem to be trying to punch their way up into the core right now. They want to own the IP. They want to be the banker.
And that's exactly what Wallerstein allows for, mobility.
Okay.
Countries can move. South Korea is a country that went from periphery to core in 2 generations.
Wow.
But it's incredibly difficult because the core protects its position aggressively. It's not a polite request to join the club. You basically have to force your way in.
So for Wallerstein, development isn't about arbitrary stages you walk through. It's about your leverage. It's about where you sit at the global negotiating table.
And usually, if you are in the periphery, you aren't even at the table. You're on the menu.
Which brings us to the specific way countries end up on the menu. We've looked at the broad theories, but our fourth pillar zooms in on a very specific economic trap. This is commodity dependence.
This moves us from philosophy straight to hard math. A commodity is just a raw material, something you pull out of the ground or grow in a field.
Oil, copper, bananas, coffee, soy.
Exactly. And the theory states that if your country's GDP relies too heavily on exporting just these few things, you are effectively doomed to slow growth.
Doomed is a strong word, but statistically you are in serious trouble.
Right. There is a very strong correlation between high commodity exports and low human development.
But why is that? Common sense would say, hey, I have a lot of oil. Oil's expensive. I should be rich.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Saudi Arabia.
There are always exceptions, but for most, the fundamental problem is volatility. That's the killer. Imagine you are the finance minister of a country where 80% of your income comes from copper exports.
Okay, I'm visualizing it. I've got the national spreadsheet open.
You plan your budget. You're going to build schools, roads, hospitals, all based on copper being $4 a pound. Then the global economy slows down slightly, maybe construction in China cools off,
Demand drops.
and suddenly copper hits $2 a pound.
My budget just got cut in half.
Overnight. And it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong internally. But suddenly you can't pay your teachers, you can't finish that highway, your currency collapses.
It makes long-term planning completely impossible. You're basically riding a roller coaster blindfolded.
It is, and it's actually worse than that. There's the concept of long-term decline. Over the last century, the price of raw materials generally trends downward relative to manufactured goods.
Can you break that down for the listener?
Sure, think of it as the espresso machine index.
I love this example.
It's great, right? In 1960, maybe selling 1 ton of coffee beans could buy you a tractor. In 2024, the tractor has computers in it. It's high-tech.
And the coffee bean.
It's still just a bean. So now you might need to sell 5 tons of beans to buy that exact same tractor.
So the goalposts just keep moving further away.
The technology gets more expensive while the raw material stays relatively cheap. So if you are a commodity country, you are running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up just to stay in the exact same place. You have to export more and more just to buy the same amount of finished goods.
And that's assuming you don't get hit by a disaster.
Right, that's the vulnerability factor. If your economy is bananas and a pest wipes out the crop, you have zero income.
Or if your economy is oil and the world suddenly switches to EVs.
You're obsolete. It's the eggs in one basket problem on a massive national scale. These microeconomies are just incredibly fragile.
So we've unpacked 4 very different lenses here today. We have Rostow's ladder dependencies, Trapp-Wallerstein's system, and the commodity curse. When you step back and look at them all together, what's the synthesis here? How do we make sense of the world using all 4?
The synthesis is really that no single theory explains everything, but together they explain the web. They're different layers of the same onion.
Rostow gives us the internal view. You do need infrastructure and education. You can't develop without them. That part is demonstrably true.
Correct. You definitely need preconditions for takeoff. But dependency theory reminds us that you can't just build infrastructure in a vacuum. You have to navigate a global market that might actually be rigged against you. It checks Rostow's optimism.
And Wallerstein shows us that the goal isn't just to grow, but to change your actual role. You want to move from the guy digging the hole to the guy selling the shovel.
Or better yet, the guy owning the mining company.
Exactly. And commodity dependence is a warning sign on the side of the road. It tells you diversify or die.
Right. If you stay stuck selling raw rocks, you will never catch up to the countries selling microchips. It explains the mechanics of exactly why the periphery stays poor.
It really changes how you look at a simple label that says, made in Bangladesh or coffee from Colombia.
It does. We are the high mass consumption stage Rostow talked about, but that consumption is often fueled by the labor in the periphery that dependency theory describes. We are connected to them by invisible lines of trade and, frankly, exploitation.
It's uncomfortable, isn't it? We like to think our wealth is purely a product of our own innovation, but these theories suggest our wealth is partially derived from their poverty.
Good social science should be uncomfortable. It challenges your place in the world. It forces you to look at the entire supply chain, not just the shiny product at the end.
So before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought that's been nagging me throughout this entire discussion.
Let's hear it.
We talked heavily about the friction between the core and the periphery. If the current system, the one that gives us cheap smartphones, fast fashion, and year-round avocados, if it structurally requires a periphery to provide cheap labor and resources,
I see where you're going with this.
is global equality actually achievable under the current economic model? Or does this system literally require inequality to function? Think about it. If the periphery successfully climbed Rostow's ladder, if everyone made it to stage 5, who would make the cheap stuff? Who would mine the cobalt?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question. If everyone lives like the global north, do we need 3 planets worth of resources to sustain it? The system might not be designed for everyone to win. It might be designed for a few to win at the expense of the many.
A cheery thought to end on, for sure.
Always here to brighten the mood.
But that's exactly why we do this. To understand the heavy machinery underneath the daily headlines. Thanks for diving in with us today. It's a lot to process, but it certainly makes the news make a lot more sense.
Absolute pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next one.